Ricky and Bobby, two neglected brothers living on a farmhouse under their single, drunk, and tobacco-addicted father in the Appalachian boonies, are no strangers to the sight of death. Being out here near the lush wilderness, they've seen their fair share of something dead. They were all either from hunters' kills, road kills, or in most cases, their kills. Because as much as these brothers were young, they were also destructively curious. Ricky enjoyed taking stray cats, breaking each of their legs with a family axe, and tossing them down the nearby well, leaving them there for days at a time, until all he would hoist back up was a decomposing carcass of what was once lively and had 9 lives. Ricky didn't care. He would snuff all 9 of those lives at once, just to see the lights in their eyes fade away. Bobby, on the other hand, was more of the copycat, following closely behind his brother and watching everything he did while joining in on the bloodbath. Cats weren't the only victims to their torturous behavior. Birds, unlucky to have been caught in their nets, would then be drenched in gasoline and set on fire as they let them back up to fly into the air, only to fall back down like a fiery Icarus. Rats and mice would get the blender treatment. Dogs would find themselves missing their eyeballs, as well as their tongues. Even mere garden snails would be showered with bleach and salt. As with each and every animal they tortured, lit their eyes with excitement. But the one thing they've craved, but haven't seen die yet, was a human being. That would change, for that very night, they could hear faint car tires burning rubber down the street. Scratch! They heard, waking their father up at the dead of night, upsetting him to the sheer point of him kicking open the screen door to his front porch and yelling at the top of his lungs, "Stop that racket!" And again, the car went, "Screech!" Agitated and on edge, Ricky and Bobby's father barges back into the house, only to grab his shotgun from the bedroom closet, and storms outside, shooting into the air, while standing in the middle of the road, eyes and shotgun both locked onto their headlights. "If you don't stop, I will shoot!" he hollered. Even his sons could see the red veins pop in his neck, even from the second-story window from their farmhouse. The car got louder. The car got closer. And then, SCREEECH KER-PLUNK! With the unloading of a gun ringing in their ears, they couldn't believe their eyes as they witnessed their father brutally run over by the stranger in the car, who didn't stop and continued to burn rubber, speeding off into the distance, until all they could hear were their father's dying groans crying for his sons. Ricky and Bobby jumped out of bed and hurried outside to their father's aid. But as they stood before his mangled body, limbs torn, eyes squashed like grapes, torso twisted and folded in half, and his jaw missing entirely, all while laying in his own warm blood. The boys have never seen a dying man before, and instead of calling for help, they both picked up a pair of small branches and began to poke and prod the father's body over and over and over again. Curiosity winning over the need to help this dying man, while he moans, groans, and cries, all until he finally dies before their very eyes. As the warm body now started to stiffen and become cold, all the poking and prodding didn't give Ricky enough satisfaction once he was dead. So he quickly got bored and began to walk back inside the house, not accepting the fact that the father was now dead. Bobby, on the other hand, was still fascinated, sticking the tip of the branch into his father's empty eye socket, twisting it back and forth, and listening to the squishy sounds of blood and brain matter. From the second-story window, Ricky yells for Bobby to get back to bed. So with that said, Bobby scuttled back inside, leaving the poor father rotting out on the road. Once they were back in bed and slowly drifting to sleep, Ricky heard a faint breath against his ear and a grumble.
Why didn't you save me, boy?
Then it smacks him back into reality as he jolts up and sees no one there beside his bed, just Bobby asleep on the top of his bunk. Then peering outside his window, to his shock, he notices the father's corpse was gone. Just a streak of blood trailing down their yard and up the porch. Then suddenly a strange breeze rolls through, sending chills down his spine. And for whatever reason, he could have sworn he saw a face and a figure materialize at the corner of the room out of thin air. A face that looked very agitated and on edge, until it then vanishes after a single blink of an eye.
Bobby, get up! Did you see that? Screamed Ricky, his voice crackling, as Bobby slowly inches up out of bed, rubbing his eyes and shaking his head no. Ricky stammers and assures that he just saw Dad, dead and deathly in the corner of the room, looking as he did a while ago from the pavement. Bobby still shook his head and yawned, telling him that he's off to take a quick bathroom break, climbing off the bunk and shuffling out into the dark hallway, leaving Ricky all alone to his thoughts and to whomever or whatever is there with him. Suddenly, the sound of a springy mattress catches his attention above him, as Ricky notices the top bunk moving, as if Bobby was still in bed. But he obviously isn't. The movement seemed to sound like something was leaning over the top edge towards him, as he curled himself against his headboard. Something wet drips to the hardwood floor. Something dark, possibly red. As the indescribable twisted head of his father peeks over from the edge of the bunk, looking dead into his eyes, with his eyeless eyes, and a branch stabbed into one of his sockets.
Why didn't you save me, boy? You left me to die. You and your brother. The both of you let me die.
The head spoke before detaching from its body and rolling along the floor until stopping at the edge of the doorway, still fixated on Ricky. But Ricky wasn't there for long, as he screeched at the top of his lungs and hurried out of the room and out of the house, following the blood trail that led to the road,
his hands on his head, heart pounding heavily, trying to catch his breath. But to his dismay, he could hear his father's groaning all around him, a cold breath against his ear. No matter where he turned, only he and his brother could hear his screams, as the nearest neighbors were almost a mile away from them. Ricky was beyond scared. He was frantically checking over his shoulder, hearing voices whisper into his ear, almost as if the voices were digging right into his brain, driving this boy insane. He could see his father's distorted body a step closer, no matter where he or how far he ran, until he stepped backwards onto the road, and out of nowhere, a pair of headlights locked eyes with him, looking like a deer at the other end of his speeding car, coming down the road.
Screech Kerplunk.
And from the darkness, the inevitable happened. The sound of the car running over Ricky chilled the air as Bobby barges outside after hearing the commotion. Bobby walks over the Ricky's mangled, dismembered, and twisted body, laying in his own pool of blood. Almost deja vu. But instead of calling for help, regardless of Ricky's cries to save his life, Bobby ignored everything around him, hearing only white noise, while he picks up the branch that Ricky once used on his dad, and without hesitation began to poke and prod his dying brother's body over and over and over again, until he was dead for now.